Okay, well, we may have some others joining us, so apologies if I look distracted as I try and add people in from the lobby. But good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending our webinar, The Future of Work, part 2, should we say. Where are we now? Some of you may remember back in May 2021, we had a look at the changing world of work as it was at the time. And following a survey that we had done and just some discussion amongst the Alliance, we thought it would be a good topic to revisit. So here we are today. My name is Nick Caton, I'm chairperson of the Alliance Finance, and we are going to be looking today at, I guess, the term that has been more used than ever before of hybrid working. And as well as just the new normal and what the workplace looks like, we're also going to be looking at the working week, as there has been a push to reevaluate the working week following, well, I think it was first mentioned by Francis Agradia back in 2018 for the 4-day week, and we have a member of the 4-day week campaign joining us today, as they are currently undertaking a trial of 70 companies, over 70 companies, I believe, and it's being coordinated by themselves and leading universities. So it'll be interesting to see how that's going. Obviously, the impact of various lockdowns has been quite far-reaching in terms of employers realizing what was possible, and the traditional office and 9-to-5 structure has suddenly been challenged. But more than that, it's perhaps allowed normal working people to really reevaluate what a work-life balance looks like for them and what they are looking to gain out of it, what their priorities are, and what they're willing or unwilling to compromise for their employment. We're going to be joined today by 4 speakers who are going to try and dissect that, the impact that's had in different ways of working in the workplace, how we're seeing differences in productivity and innovation. Are we seeing a better balance, or are we seeing more pressure on employees? And what extent does working from home change your identity as an employee? As always, we'd like to hear from you in the chat box. If you have any questions for the speakers, my colleagues Caroline and Kevin, thank you guys. We'll be monitoring them, and after each speaker, there'll be a short space for questions. And if we have time, a discussion at the end of any other points that have not been covered. This is also going to be recorded as always, and so if you know anyone who hasn't been able to make it, or if you think someone else in your organization may find this of interest, just either just for their own interest or to start a fuller conversation with your employer about working time, then you can go to alliance4finance.org, where you will find the recordings. So waiting on me to finish talking are the CEO of Bitesize, Paul Hodder, 4-day week campaign officer, Mariam Salman, and in the we also have Lindsay White, who's communication director of the Financial Services Skills Commission. But first of all, we're going to be hearing from Chief Intelligence Officer at McCann World Group, Laura Simpson. So, Laura, over to you. Let me just make sure I am unmuting you. Oh no, you can do it yourself. So,
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nick. Really excited to be joining you all today. Just so you know sort of why I'm here really, and what I'm going to be talking about specifically is I actually put together a piece for Radio 4 earlier this year for a program called Forethought, and I spoke for a short time about really my own experiences of hybrid working, as well as some of the data that we've collected at McCann World Group. So I'm in a research function, so we collect global data on attitudes to lots of different things, so everything from privacy through to wellness and diversity and attitudes to work. So I'm going to be speaking about some of the data we've seen, and also putting it in the context of some of my own experiences. I don't have any slides to share, so you'll just be listening to me for the next sort of 10 minutes or so. So at my son's birthday earlier this year, he blew out his own candles, surrounded by a group of 12 friends. And a mother turned to me and said, "Do you remember when we thought our kids wouldn't be able to blow out their own candles ever again? That we'd have to wave them out with our hands forever?" A week later, I attended my first big post-lockdown in-person work meeting. There were 50 people from more than 10 countries, all in the same room for 2 days. In the evening, a colleague of mine ordered a particularly delicious drink from the bar. The drink was passed around and several people had a taste from the same glass. The phrase "COVID safe" flickered briefly in my mind as I took a surreptitious sip. For the last 20 years, I've been studying cultural change and consumer trends, and I've been advising companies on how best to navigate the future. As you may imagine, COVID made a mockery of the predictions business. We analysed the data, we made countless PowerPoint decks, and we used the word unprecedented an unprecedented number of times. The phrase "new normal" was muttered in meetings like an insidious mantra. Understanding this new normal was a vital pursuit because in the face of such catastrophic and disruptive change, surely the old normal was dead forever. Everyone wanted to know what was here to stay and what was a cultural blip. Is the baking here to stay, or the gardening, or the virtual meetings, or the homeschooling, or the hygiene obsession, or the social distancing, or the mental health webinars, or the street WhatsApp groups? And yet here I am in 2022 at a birthday, at a meeting, and it seems, well, normal, kind of like the old normal. Back in 2021, we asked 30,000 people around the world whether in the future they would prefer to do everything from doctor's appointments to music concerts to gym classes in real life, online, or in a hybrid fashion. And the results showed a strong preference across situations and across cultures for face-to-face interaction. It turned out that for all the virtual happy hours and the chat about the metaverse, it was in real life FaceTime that most people were seeking, but with one notable exception. When we asked people whether they would prefer their future work to be mostly in real life, online, or hybrid, the results are far less conclusive. Because for the most part, this is the one thing that's stuck. Kids are blowing out their own candles, people are having big weddings, but many people are still working from home at least a few days a week. And companies are cautiously, and in some cases not so cautiously, navigating this new employee preference. In June, Elon Musk remarked that if employees don't show up in the office, he'll assume they've left. As a leader in a large organisation, I do know that having everyone working at home does present some challenges for building company culture. However, there is a reason the virtual meetings and working from home is the pandemic behaviour that stuck. Put simply, many people prefer working at home for many obvious reasons. More surprisingly, perhaps, many people actually prefer virtual meetings. Personally, I've come to believe that when deployed well, virtual meetings can have the power to boost creativity and drive inclusion. After all, the meeting is the fundamental unit of white-collar working life. This is where most of our precious time is spent. It's where issues are thrashed out, it's where ideas are tested, and where decisions are made. Meetings are also a thing that we complain about incessantly. It was reported back in 2017 that only 1 in 6 executives felt that meetings were a good use of their time. And it was reported in 2019 that 2/3 of workers felt that meetings were actually stopping them from getting their best work done. So how is it that something that so many of us spend so much time doing is widely regarded as dysfunctional? The pandemic offered us a radical opportunity to rethink all kinds of things. Indeed, Radio 4 has its own excellent Rethink series. And in terms of work, the pandemic encouraged us to rethink everything, from how we do vacation time to how we hire people. But for me, one of the most important opportunities it offered us was to rethink how we do meetings in the long term. Personally, I've had a somewhat uneasy relationship with meetings over the years. Indeed, feeling deeply anxious in meetings was pretty much a given for me 20 years ago. I worried that my hands would be clammy when I shook the client's hand and the more I worried, the sweatier my hands became. I worried that I was wearing the wrong thing, but mostly I worried that I wouldn't have anything sufficiently interesting or additive to say. I would watch and listen to the smart, experienced people around the table, and I would look for a small opening in the conversation where I might insert a comment that made my presence meaningful in some way. When I couldn't think of anything to say, I wrote notes furiously and perfected what I hoped was a bookish and curious presence, in the hopes that people would assume my head was full of insightful observations rather than abject fear. Around the same time, I was also learning how to moderate focus groups and identify so-called dominant respondents. These are the people who hijack the conversation, talk incessantly, and challenge you as the leader of the group. I learned, for example, that the dominant respondent in a focus group would tend to sit directly opposite you or next to you. In these early years of my career, I began to observe similar power dynamics in agency meetings. The senior client would often sit at the head of the table. The men would generally speak more than the women. The senior people would give long, self-aggrandizing introductions. The junior people would always troubleshoot the plentiful IT issues. The younger women would often deal with the catering, and the agency people would never be late, but the clients often would be. The hierarchy of the people in the meeting was continually reinforced through patterns of behaviour. On reflection, this doesn't seem conducive to encouraging diversity of thought or creativity or diversity in general. I've also noticed moments over the years when this power hierarchy has been disrupted in interesting ways. In the pre-pandemic days, our Chief Strategy Officer and now President introduced herself as the strategy person during a round of intros at the beginning of a meeting. It was a small but significant thing for me at the time. Here was the most senior person in the room, reminding everyone in a subtle way that we were all just people around a table with jobs to do and equal and valid contributions to make. In our most recent research, we found something intriguing. Among people who self-identify as a minority, 8 in 10 believe that remote work has helped their working life and encouraged diversity. For many, it seems that the virtual meeting is not only a way to keep safe from COVID, it's also something of a leveler. The hand raise function in Microsoft Teams or in other virtual platforms allows those who are reticent to speak over others to get some airtime. The chat window allows for contributions from more introverted people who might not want to speak in front of the group. In terms of encouraging diversity, junior employees now find themselves more frequently in virtual meetings with clients and with senior people because there are fewer limits on the number of people in the room. It goes without saying that there is less pressure on dress codes and that shaking sweaty hands is no longer an issue. As the ways we have always done things is eroded, it's the traditionally underrepresented groups who stand to gain the most from these new frameworks for engagement and success. Throughout the pandemic, we all had a little glimpse behind the curtains of the lives of our most senior clients and senior colleagues. We saw paint-covered children begging for biscuits, cats leaping in front of screens, hair that was wet from the shower, posters in a childhood bedroom. I actually have my own human moment to share along these lines. During the pandemic, my husband was researching a novel about a mystery in Antarctica, and unbeknownst to me, he had been using my laptop to do research for his novel. During a client meeting, I shared my screen. There was an awkward pause, and then a colleague piped up. Laura, is there a reason you've been Googling how long you can keep a dead body in a freezer? Amusing anecdotes aside, the pandemic upended the carefully controlled boardroom environment. The glass table is no more, and I don't know who's sitting at the head of the table because there isn't one. This isn't to say, of course, that power dynamics are a thing of the past. Who gets to turn their camera off, for example? Is it rude to turn my camera off when someone is presenting, even if I want to do some squats because I've been sitting for 3 hours? And who gets to drop off 5 minutes before the meeting ends because they've got someone else to talk to or somewhere more important to be. And how will all of this play out as we continue to blend the physical office space with the virtual world of working from home? Will the power of presence in the office make the remote workers feel like outsiders once more? A new rulebook is emerging for the so-called hybrid meeting. I recently attended a meeting in the office where an equal number of colleagues attended virtually. When the meeting ended, someone turned to me and said, "We can't discuss the meeting now. We have to just leave the room." "Oh, why?" I said. "Because if we have the real meeting after the meeting, then the virtual people will feel left out," they said. Which makes perfect sense, of course, but it doesn't really allow for how human beings generally operate. Any doctor will tell you about the importance of the doorknob conversation. This is the last thing the patient tells you when they have their hand on the door. And it's often the most important piece of information or the real reason they came to see you in the first place. How do we replicate the doorknob conversation in a virtual or hybrid world? One thing I do know to be true is that almost every company I work with is currently thinking about their approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think if we can somehow take the best things we learned in virtual meetings and blend them with the best of physical meetings, we can shape a new world of work. But as some meetings start to shift back to the conference room, what does leadership and power look like in a post-pandemic world? Let me take you back to the 50-person meeting I talked about at the start of this talk. On the surface, it looked and smelled like an old school agency meeting with cheek kissing and colleagues reunited. But look a little deeper and another story emerges. The meeting kicked off with 3 presentations from leadership. Once upon a time, these would have been high-level sessions to talk about our company mission and business performance to set the agenda. But instead, people used this time to tell personal stories of family members who'd suffered, of mental health struggles, of health crisis, of new perspectives, of a newfound appreciation for time with family. Let's not forget, they said. So even though this meeting looks like the old normal, the deeper undercurrents reveal a new vulnerability, a fragility, a humanity. So once again, I get a sense that the old school conservative meeting is a little shook up, even in the real world. And that's a good thing, because research shows that even before the pandemic, meetings weren't working for the majority of workers in the majority of circumstances. So let's not go back to the way things were. Let's find a new way of working and meeting that works for everyone. If I could travel back in time, I would reassure 24-year-old Laura that listening is just as valuable as speaking. I would tell her that her presence in meetings was always meaningful. I also wish I could gift her the hand raise function. Thank you very much, everyone. That is all from me.
That's great. Thank you so much, Laura. Some really interesting points that you made there. I'd just like to say as well, what I do miss about coming back to the office is the Friday morning quizzes. So Caroline, if we can bring that back, that'd be great. But I really like your point about the meetings have become, I think, more human, more personal as well. I think in the past that has been very, and I will say exclusive, and perhaps people have felt more able to speak about their personal lives, because it's difficult not to when you're perhaps in your bedroom or you know, in your kitchen, to make it more personal. So thank you very much. Kevin, Caroline, is there any questions that you have?
Shall I go first, Caroline? So Laura, I'm going to give you sort of some open space and suggest some topics and see how you want to take them. I think the first one is perhaps the opposite side of the coin somewhat, so the disconnect. Do you think there is any indication that the rise of working from home has led to more disconnect between people and their identity at work, their work team, feeling less of that? And also around the other side of that, you talked about Elon Musk and his, one view of the world, but certainly within AFF, the Alliance for Finance, we've been seeing that a number of employers want to see more bodies back in the office, whereas others are taking a different approach, maybe something that is far more hybrid. And some have gone, actually, we've discovered the new future and it's less time in the office. Very interested in terms of what your data and just what your insights are into those two things. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's a great space for me to speak to, I think. So I think the first thing I would say is I definitely don't have all the answers. I think I'm still thinking through all of this, and I know the company I work for is still thinking through like the best path forward. I would say I think my general thought or theme is everything you do should be done with intention and with purpose, and come from a place of real thoughtfulness. So I get very nervous when I hear people saying, well, I think it would just be better if everyone was back in the office, because that's what we were doing before and it worked. So let's just go back to what we had before. Like that makes me very nervous, because I think that is being driven by people who are sort of seeking comfort in a previous model without necessarily interrogating what we can learn from the experience we've had, and what a better path forward might be. So that's the first thing I would say. I think to your point about a disconnect, I would 100% agree that that's a risk. It's certainly something I've seen in my own organisation, and I think it's definitely something we have to work hard to mitigate against. So I think at the end of the day, whether you're at home or you're in a meeting, or whether you're physically in an office and you're having a meeting, or whether you're in some kind of third space, all of those things are just tools, right? They're just tools and different ways that we can bring people together, and we can bring the best out of those individuals. And like any tool, it's about how you deploy them, right? And how you use them to max effect. So we've thought very hard, and I've thought very hard about how to get the most out of virtual meetings, and use virtual meetings as a way to engender a feeling of belonging and continue to build our culture. My view is that can come through lots of really small things. So, for example, we tend to begin every one of our meetings with what we call a check-in. So we say, how is everyone feeling today? Can you share a GIF or a video or an image in the chat to tell us all how you're feeling? And in the space of a minute, you've got you might have 20 GIFs, right? And then the moderator or whoever's running the meeting will go, hey, I see that Mark, you're feeling tired. Mary, you're super excited. What great energy in the room. And you can do things like that, which immediately just help everyone drop their shoulders and have that little moment of belonging at the beginning of a meeting. The other thing that we've done in the team that I work for specifically is try to, again, come up with creative ways to create that sense of culture and belonging, even when many of us are working virtually. So again, this is like a little idea, but it's been really, really successful. We had everyone on the team do their own version of Desert Island Discs and make their own podcasts, right? So every member of the team recorded a little podcast, which was like my favorite 5 songs and kind of what they tell you about me. And then they send that podcast to everyone listens to it. And then we just have a meeting like once every month where we listen to that person's podcast, we talk about it, and they tell us about themselves and their music. So I think there are really creative ways that you can use virtual meetings and working from home to still, engender those feelings of connection and identity. And let's not forget that there were plenty of people, particularly people from marginalized groups, that didn't feel like they had a great sense of identity, in the physical working space, right? And I'm not saying that's true for everyone. And they may have found new expressions of identity in the virtual world. So again, it's all about getting that balance right, I think, and not assuming that there's like a one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to things like DE&I, which obviously we all know is a very complex issue and process, and we're all still learning tons about, you know, things like neurodiversity and how people thrive in different environments, you know, and actually virtual environments can be really good for people, you know, with particular types of neurodiversity, right? So again, I don't have all the answers. I just have lots of thoughts on how we can optimize both the physical meeting and the virtual meeting, and sometimes bring the two together.
That's great, thank you. I think that not one size fits all really resonates with me and the research that we did within AFF. It was small, but it was again that same sort of survey of actually the best thing to do. And again, I think you were saying this at the beginning, go and ask people what they want. Don't just take an assumption that, as you say, we all want to get back to blowing out candles in the workplace, that equivalent, you know, the old was the best. I think you're very right in terms of that database. We shouldn't just assume that what we had before was the best solution. I think we would also around and say there were bits we wanted to change. Nick, can I fit in one more question, or are we up to time? I can, right. Laura, in terms of data, so do you have anything more that talks about who wants to do home working and working from home? And does that cut across genders? Could it be, and I risk putting myself out there, people, I'm just asking the question before people start throwing bricks, please, but could it be that more females actually end up doing home working, and that subtly pushes what used to be called the traditional secondary worker? And is that helping or not helping by gender? And then finally, are there socioeconomic factors which play into this as well? Are there people who can better afford to work from home or work less days a week or work part-time? Again, your thoughts on that, please. I don't expect all the answers.
Yeah. So interestingly, in terms of the data, the strongest correlation in terms of people who wanted to continue working from home in terms of coming back to the office was actually age, and younger people were much more wanting to continue fluidity in the context of work, so hybridity and virtual work, which I was quite interested in and surprised by to some extent. I would say we did that data that's kind of like a little bit more than a year old now, so I don't know if that will have changed, but I think it does correlate with something I've observed and I've kind of heard anecdotally, which is sometimes it's very, very senior people within an organization who want to see workers, right? Like, I want to see people so I know that they're working, and that reassures me. And even though they can like see the productivity figures and they know that, you know, the company's still succeeding, they have a like nervousness about sort of not seeing people and kind of fully trusting people. I also I was reading an interesting article again about sometimes how very, very, very senior people in senior roles, their whole role, when you become very, very senior in an organization, your role becomes a performance, and it's about being seen. It's a very visible role, right? You're in a big office, you're in a glass office, people see you being very, very important, and it's like you need to be seen, right? Like it's like your status comes from people seeing you doing your job as a CEO, because you're not writing reports, you're not doing things behind the scene. Your job is a performance, and what's the point in having a performance if there's no one around to see you? So, you know, there's some like interesting dynamics there which I'm still like thinking through. But to the point about diversity and sort of men versus women and different socioeconomic grades, I think that is a bit of a complex question, honestly, and I'm not trying to cop out of it, but I think there's a lot of different things to unpick there, because on the one hand, certainly we see a little bit in the data, and also I know anecdotally that, you know, there are lots of women who do prefer that flexibility, right? The ability to work a little bit more in a way that suits you, sometimes from home, sometimes, I know from my own point of view, I've got 2 young kids, and, last week my son was off school and unwell, and, he was still being looked after actually by my husband, but I like being at home, just being able to like check on him and just be there and not feel the pressure to have to come into the office. But I also know I'm in a very privileged position, right? Like I'm an affluent mother, which again puts me in a different situation to, being at home and having a chaos of children around you and not having a separate space to work and all of those complex issues. So I think I can see both sides of the argument. I think your point about does it mean that if women end up working from home more, it sort of diminishes their status somehow in the workplace, or they sort of become secondary workers? I can see that as a risk, honestly, and I think the onus is on organisations to make sure that doesn't happen, right? And that's not just for women, that's for people who are working in all kinds of different ways, in different modes, in different environments. If you want to get the best out of your workplace, if you want to have the most talented individuals, you're going to need different strategies for making sure that people can thrive in different situations. And that means the onus is on the organisation to set people up for success. But yes, I can see that that's a risk, and it's something we need to mitigate against.
Thank you, Laura.
That's great. Thank you. I was interested about the being seen at meetings as well, and I read something about meetings having increased something like, I don't know, 400%. I can't remember the exact figure, but that that's obviously because we've got the technology and these things. But I wonder if it's also so that more senior people can do that performance for their staff as well, so that they're constantly putting in these meetings. And I think that's something that needs to be guarded against as well, having too many meetings that could have been an email, for instance. So thank you, Laura. Okay, well now we are going to hear from Paul Hodder. So Paul, I'll let you introduce yourself and fire away.
Hi, thank you very much, Nick. Yes, I have got some slides to share, so I'm just going to work the technology for a second and make sure that we can all see this one. So hopefully by thumbs up, you'll be able to see that right now. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, very interesting stuff from Laura, and hopefully some of the things I've got to say will reinforce that. My name's Paul Hodder. I'm Managing Director of Bite Size Learning, and I guess let me just click that one forward, about 40% of our business is in the financial services industry and across the whole sector. The rest of it in other areas, I've just lost everyone, so I'm just going to try and get you back a second. There you go. I've got you back now. Always disconcerting. For some reason, I can't see you. I love the technology when it works. Let me just do that and try that. No, I keep losing you.
Well, we can see you, I think. So getting the slide, the pie chart. And
you are getting it. Good. Yeah. Can you see it like that? Okay.
Yeah, not as clear, but yes.
Okay.
That's
well, then what I'll do is I'll just reduce that and then I can see you. Yeah, so we've got about 40% of our work is across the financial services sector. It was more, but we've encouraged a lot of other organisations. So we're now working across quite a number of sectors. So we're seeing how different sectors are reacting to this, different organisations are reacting to this challenge, everything from small technology firms through to charities and even British Antarctic Survey, who know a little bit about remote working because they've been doing it for quite some time. And about 18% of the work that we did last year was delivering programs that were specifically around hybrid working. We expected that to fall this year, and as a percentage terms, it's fallen just a little bit. mainly because we've got a much bigger footprint this year in diversity and inclusion, and there's been a bigger call on leadership development. But as we assimilated the hybrid working learning into all of our other programs, because it became part of what we did, we thought there would be a drop-off, a significant drop-off. But in terms of raw numbers, we're actually delivering more hybrid working programs this year. And by that, I mean programs like managing hybrid workers, effective hybrid working, making hybrid meetings work, and presenting in a hybrid world. You know, it's surprised us that we thought organisations, they moved from wanting to know what the problems would be to experiencing the problems and wanting some solutions. And we thought they would now be moving into having those solutions, but they, as Laura said, they're still really trying to work this stuff out and needing to workshop a lot of these ideas quite deeply still. And I think it's a changing environment, and that's one of the things I do want to talk about. I think people change. I think their needs change. So what I've picked up from all the discussions we're having with all the organisations we are talking to about hybrid working, 5 things I think that we've seen are contributing to success. The first one is not just managing outputs. I think through history, there have always been these kind of sound bites that get into management learning, like don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And you end up with a bunch of people with a problem and they don't feel that they can come to you with it. So it remains a secret. And we're working with another organization who had this soundbite around the manager as coach, and then found that they got a lot of people who were not getting enough direction because people have picked up that they should always be coaching. And I think one of the sound bites that seems to have crept in around people working from home is that you should manage outputs. And for reasons we'll see, that can be quite damaging and quite dangerous. So I want to talk about that. Listen deeply and listen often. The best organizations just keep listening and keep asking the question. I want to talk about that. I think when people come into the office, it has to be a valuable experience, and the good organizations are thinking about that quite deeply. I've got a thing in there called rebalance. I think the world has moved and organizations need to rebalance and rethink quite a number of things. I've just picked up on a couple. And then the last one is that organizations, if you want hybrid to work, you've got to take up for hybrid. You know, face-to-face is easiest, and I will say this a bit later on. Remote working is easy enough. Hybrid is actually quite difficult, and so you have to think quite deeply about how you're going to make that happen. So I just want to touch on a few of these things. I've just pulled some stats here which kind of just show this. 93% of HR leaders are concerned about employee burnout in the hybrid model. That's supported by the fact that we're now working an average of 9.2 hours per week of unpaid overtime, up from an average of 7.3. So, you know, even what's being reported is that people are working a lot longer. 74% of employees find it harder to create boundaries. And yet, going back to what Laura was just saying, despite all of that, leaders say the shift to hybrid work has made it challenging to have confidence that employees are being productive. So as Laura said, this is very much about confidence that it's going on. Even though the numbers are the same, we're not sure about it. And I think what's happening is a lot of people are not feeling comfortable having those discussions. We find that within financial services, still, not in all not across the whole thing, but in a lot of areas, leadership management is seen as a bit of a side of desk activity or a bolt-on still, really. And a lot of people take their technical work very, very seriously and then do a bit of management. And it just isn't enough these days. So we're finding a number of problems. Of course, the problem with managing outputs, you can see what people do. You can see they've built a brick wall. You know, that's visible to you. What you can't see is whether they started at the right time, whether they had all the right resources, whether they were using the right tools. We don't see all the mistakes that they made along the way. You don't see the anxiety that they might have had leading up to it. And I think worse still, when somebody says in an office that they're going to stay a bit late to finish something, a bit late might be 6 or 7 o'clock. When you're working from home, staying a bit late to finish something could be 11 o'clock, could be 12 o'clock, could be 4 o'clock in the morning. And we're not seeing that. So if we're just managing outputs, we're missing out on so much of understanding of the process. Just one other side thing that happens, I think, as a result of this as well, you get very much a hub and spoke kind of management thing where everything is being fed back to the manager, and the manager then feeds that back out to everybody. And it's affecting the collaboration across people because you're now only measuring the outputs. One of the things that really surprised us when we go in and we do management training is just how basic some of these issues are. And I think the good organizations are doing a lot of refresher work at quite basic level in terms of management training. So we get questions like this quite often in the training. I can't see what they're doing, but I don't want them to think I don't trust them. So they haven't had the conversation. So they're relying on managing the outputs, which is a bit of a problem. And we even do some really basic work around this. And again, I was really interested that Laura talked about managing intention. That intention and purpose are so important. And so in this one, we're finding we're having to go right back to basics. We're having to do some really basic stuff. I don't know if any of you know the acronym. It's my favorite training acronym. Training is full of acronyms and thoughts and models. That's my favorites. If you don't know it, WAIT stands for why am I talking? I think it's a question people should ask themselves a bit more often. But in this context, we just get people to think, well, then why are you asking people what they're doing? Why is it you need to know that? And then using 5 whys, which is kind of root cause analysis stuff, we just dig a little bit deeper and say, well, why does this matter? Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why does it matter that you know what people are doing? And of course, the truth under there is absolutely reasonable, that if you can't see what people are doing, you don't know whether they're overloaded, you don't know whether to praise them, you don't know whether to give them help, you don't know whether to give them more work or less work. So in short, you can't manage them. And we're having to train managers just to have those really straightforward conversations about wanting to be good managers for people that work at home, not being apologetic about wanting to find out what they're doing. It's because it helps the management process. So we're finding that good organizations are really having to cut some fairly fundamental stuff, but in the context of not being able to see what people are doing at home. And then we can move on to other things about, this is just taken from our hybrid, managing hybrid workers model. We can start to move on then to talking a little bit more in depth about the things that managers might need to do and attend to in order to make hybrid working effective. Things like clarity, making sure you're providing clear focus and direction and people have heard it. Thinking about your communication process, both the formal and informal processes, and making sure we're using the correct medium, that we're bringing people together at the right time. Creating that sense of community that I mentioned, so that you're not getting the hub and spoke approach to leadership and management. And then also just making sure that we're promoting good health. That there was a real, funny enough, the question came up earlier, there was a real surge in well-being training right at the beginning of lockdown. And then I think organizations thought, well, we've got our, we'll put it out to our EAP, to our employee assistance programs, and we've got that in place. And that was it. We can just call somebody if they've got a problem. And now they've realized that that isn't enough again. And the good organizations are saying, actually, we need to revisit this and really attend to it and do a lot more. So we've seen a surge again in mental health first aid training and things like that. Just one other thing on this thing, it's something that we've noticed quite a lot, and we heard a lot of people in our training courses saying things like, I could be working for anyone here. What was happening is they were getting much closer to their direct working group, so their manager and their team, because they were seeing each other on a regular basis, they were seeing into each other's homes, and the links were getting stronger within the team. But they were getting further apart with everything else. The silos were increasing because this was becoming closer, and everybody else was becoming separated, and so that organisations losing a bit of their gravity, and we saw that. We saw the turnover rates going on, the big resignation, people moving around quite a lot. So organisations were losing a bit of their gravity. And they were relying on managers, I think, to create that gravity. And that's fine if you've got great managers. So, you know, again, thinking about the significance of leadership and management. And I honestly think we saw a surge in leadership training because remote and hybrid working exposed some holes that were being plastered over beforehand. And the other question in all of this is, if it's not about the experience, what can you do to help people feel the brand at home? And we did notice that some really good organizations were doing a lot to make sure people, you know, they get good materials sent to them, their notebooks are sent out to them regularly if people use notebooks anymore. But whatever it is, that the organizations are really thinking differently about how we create that sense of belonging to something larger. Just a few things to say on this, because I think we know this, but I guess we've all been in this situation. You know, we go to a party, but we think, I nearly didn't go. And you know, if you ask me while I'm sitting in front of the television with the fire on and a drink in my hand, if I want to go to the pub, I'd probably say no. And I think also, if you'd asked everybody when they're sitting at home, worried about infection, worried about getting ill, able to work because everything's got in their place, going into work and spending all that money seems like a big effort. And certainly if I'm struggling a little bit with my well-being, I might retreat into the home as well. So it's not that people don't want to work from home. I think the evidence that Laura said is that people do want flexibility. But I think we have to be quite careful. People want flexibility, but also a lot of people do want more collaboration and to collaborate face-to-face more often. And what I would say, and it goes back to, again, this issue of how you ask questions, really, but it's really important that we ask what people's interests are, what it is they're looking for and why, and not make them take positions like I want to work from home or I want to work 3 days a week, because that changes. But if you entrench positions, they become very hard to move. And that's the same with leadership as well. And we've heard a little bit about that. If leadership entrench their positions, then it goes wrong. Absolutely, as Laura said, if leaders don't do that, if they lead with purpose and they lead with intention and talk about what it is that they need to achieve, then you can have lots of flexibility in the way that we achieve that. And you can have a bit of dynamism in the way that you achieve it as well, because things do move and things do change. I could find myself now living in an environment that doesn't suit working from home anymore. That changed from how it might have been yesterday. So I think organizations listen deeply. They keep listening, they focus on interests, and they don't think about positions. Making the office experience valuable. I mean, so many people we talked to reported that they've been into the office and nobody was there, and it's a complete waste of time, cost them 60 quid to go in. We have to think about making this a really valuable organisation. I think, strangely, there is a sweet spot we're seeing around this, and that's organisations, although they don't want to fix it, they start with a fairly prescriptive flexibility, if you like, that they say things like, okay, we want you into the office Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. You can work Monday to choose what you would like to do on Monday and Friday, and we'll take it from there. That's just an example, but I'm finding that sometimes there's just too much choice, too much information, there's too much interference in the system. And we're finding the organizations that took a fairly prescriptive start point, but are still listening now, seem to be doing better than those that just said, do what you like, or we'll leave it up to the managers, where if they left it up to the managers, the team is favoured, not what works best, you know, how the manager felt most comfortable, not what worked best. I think there is a question on rebalancing. This is linked to the last one. You know, it costs money to work from home. There are all of these issues around, you know, the cost of energy bills if I'm working from home. It costs money to go into the office. Now, I may not been paid a London waiting in the past, which I'm now spending. Well, I'm probably spending that on my energy bills, to be honest. It costs money to run an office and to keep all of these things going. So I think organisations have just got to not shy away from this conversation, and they've got to open it up and say, let's have a real look at the way things are working and the costs of this, not just for the organisation, but for the people involved. You know, not all homes are good workspaces, not all journeys are the same. There are people that chose to move further away because they felt they only needed to come into the office once a week, so there's also an element of choice in there that we've just got to think about when we rebalance. I've just thrown this under there as well, the discussion about increase in time spent in meetings, 252% up. This is a Microsoft figure from their most recent study. Weekly time spent in meetings for the average team user. I think we need a rebalance around this as well, because we talk to so many people who say they do meetings in the daytime and they do their real work in the evening, and we're going to have to think, and all of it, I can't really add much to what Laura said really, but really think about how do we take the best from both, but not add both together, so that we've got twice as many meetings now, because we're also now doing virtual and face-to-face meetings. We've got to rethink and rebalance the way that we work. And then just finally, teching up for hybrid, the good organizations, the ones that are making this work, are realizing that this is quite a significant investment. And I think in terms of getting this equality that we want, you have to make sure that things work wherever people are sitting. And there've been some surprising things. One of the things we forgot, or we didn't realize really early on, we picked it up quite quickly, is that it's very hard for people to contribute to some difficult training programs like well-being or managing difficult conversations if they're sitting in the office on a headphone and everybody around them can hear what they're saying. So it's not just the technology, it's also the environment we have to think about and what people are using that environment for. That sometimes it's easier to contribute from home, or it's easier to contribute if we're all in an office together with nobody else listening around us. It can be quite difficult if there are some people that aren't engaged in the conversation you're having, sitting around you in the office. So really thinking hard about hybrid. It isn't just a combination of the two. It is a different entity in its own right. And we have to make sure things, just in a training world, can live participants see and contribute to the chat facility? Can virtual participants hear the live participants? Can everyone see the visual aids? I've seen people using flip charts to a virtual, to a hybrid audience, and nobody on the screen can see the chart. So it's very difficult. Does everyone have equal access to support materials? Is facilitator providing equal opportunity for contribution and giving both groups or people from home, wherever they are, equal attention? Has everyone got a safe space from which to contribute? So, just some things that we think the good organizations are getting for and people are seeing benefit from. And, I hope it's helpful, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. No, it's really good. I like what you say about managing outputs as well. I just be interested if people are interested. There's a Diary of the CEO YouTube video with Malcolm Gladwell, and he talks about it in a very different way, but managing outputs risks basically have someone working from home, perhaps on their bed, in their pajamas, and they've just become a to-do list. And I don't think that's a healthy way to be when you're trying to be an active and useful employee, etc. So I think that's a really interesting point there. Probably got enough time for one question, if that's okay. Kevin, anything that you've got?
I can. I'm just going to defer to Caroline first, because Paul was fantastic at answering a lot of the questions I already had. I do still have one, which is about recruitment and induction and whether I had any experience of that. But Caroline, do you have any more topical than that?
Nothing that's come in from the chat, because it was a really thorough presentation. The only thing I would say, in line with what Paul was saying with regards to going into the office and finding it empty, there are often people in teams who want to go in, who want that experience, and it's not about doing always what's just best for you as an individual. Going into the office as a team encourages those people who want to go in and gives that opportunity for interaction, because otherwise you're just sort of encouraging them to go down the same route as you if they go in and it's an empty office all the time. So I think I'd encourage people to think about the rest of their team and what they want, as well as what works best for them.
I think true. I think some leaders, we know that some leaders are less assertive than others, and will often ask people whether they want to go into the office. And I think sometimes just leading with purpose, thinking about what you want to achieve, and actually just saying that we are going to go into the office next Thursday for this reason, can be a really positive thing. We usually get very good feedback from people that say when they've got well prepared good reason for going into the office, it works out to be highly valuable. Yeah, it's just when you turn up on your own and nobody's there, or you need somebody to coordinate that. And I think to that point as well, sometimes your team can be in there, but then nobody else's team is there. And it'd be quite nice if organisations can encourage better communication across teams, or even set up named project groups. Because a lot of the time with this siloing, what we're seeing happening is people, this is our group and we need to go to finance for this information. Well, finance aren't going to turn up on Thursday, but Joanne might. And if Joanne's named as part of the project team from the finance, if we can get that working, then Joanne can come in and, and Frida or whatever it is from other teams, we can start to work as a project and collaborate a little bit better face to face, in that way.
Thank you. No, Kevin, back to you.
Okay. So yeah, Paul, just take you in terms of training and induction. I mean, I saw a couple of bits of this. I saw something with my old employer who have people who are out as field workers, and they actually were able to really improve the whole training process, because there were still people out in the field doing it, but actually they moved boom into sort of online training and took it to a new level. Equally, I'm now hearing that all the successes around induction and recruitment, one of the biggest reason the senior managers want people in is to finish off that recruitment and that induction process, and that has to be in the office where people learn the right behaviours. Any thoughts or experiences on that you've come across? Where are we heading?
Yeah, I mean, no answers, unfortunately, but a lot of thoughts, Kevin. I mean, what we are hearing is that induction is the one place where organisations are really struggling with the training process. People are not learning by overhearing, and you pick up so much informally as a result of the induction process, to the extent that we've got some organisations now that increase their office-based time when they've got somebody new joining the team. Now, I think that's a good short-term solution. I think those people want to feel part of that team. I think that connection really helps them to do it. But it isn't impossible to induct somebody properly. I just think you need higher levels of contact time, and you need a really, really strong structure, around, real advanced thought into how you're going to run the induction process for somebody joining the organisation. To be honest, a lot of managers, people turn up on the doorstep and haven't given that amount of thought. So sitting next to them is an excuse for good is a replacement for good preparation. So yeah, I don't think there are any answers. There is a lot of problems around this, the not picking up the right behaviours, not picking up the little bits that fall in between the cracks, the nervousness over having to ask even more questions because you're not just picking that stuff up, accidentally. It is really quite strong. And at the moment, in the absence of either a lot of preparation, I would say just increasing your face-to-face time when you've got the whole team's face-to-face time when you've got somebody new in is a pretty good way to go to start with.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Great presentation. Nick, back to you.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, really good. And a final thing on that, I think one thing that seems to come through on a couple of things you've said is there's a requirement now for more jobs, coordinating people, things like coordinating coming into the office, things like inducting in a hybrid environment. These jobs didn't really need to exist before, and perhaps that's something that companies need to look at. But anyway, no, thank you very much. Right, we're going to take a 5-minute break now. So at 6 minutes past, we'll kick back off and we'll hear from Lindsay first of all. So thank you very much. Positive comments from for you there, Paul. I think everyone's loving the "Why am I talking? Wait" acronym.
Yeah, I've given it away now by saying it's my favourite. Of course, we've got loads that are better than that.
And just a final point, obviously, Paul, if we can share the slides, is that okay with the group? And all Paul's contact details and details of Bite-Sized Learning are on there if people want to have a look and perhaps speak to your organisation about the training available there. So thank you very much, Paul and Laura, who's had to drop off for another meeting, but thank you both to yourselves. We are now going to go over to Lindsay White from the Financial Services Skills Commission. So, Lindsay, I will pass over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lindsay White, Director of Communications at the Financial Services Skills Commission. Just to give you some insight into the Commission, we were set up 3 years ago by Treasury to ensure financial services organisations have the talent and skills they need for the future, so the UK can remain one of the most competitive financial centres globally. We have 38 members currently, and these include large banks, building societies, asset managers, insurers, and recently some tech firms. Post-pandemic, hybrid working has become an established part of everyday working culture and is now seen as a non-negotiable by some candidates in the labour market. The key challenge for organisations right now is how can firms successfully develop the skills and talent they need to retain in a hybrid world. If we look at the wider environment for a minute, what kind of challenges are firms facing externally? We're facing huge skills shortages, demographic trends, including an increase in life expectancy and retirement age, and increased digitisation elsewhere in the economy. To give you an example of this, the financial services sector has a record high of 51,000 vacancies. These were unfilled in March to May this year, and those are our ONS figures. Our members at the Commission, 92% of members have hard to fill vacancies last year. So just to drill down into this, one of our members, a well-known insurer, recently posted a job advert for a data management role and received 177 applicants when advertised as fully flexible and 17 when the job was advertised 2 to 3 days in the office. Myself and my CEO recently held a member knowledge sharing session on hybrid working to discuss and debate the issues around how organisations are adapting to flexible working and ensuring their employees are equipped with the necessary skills for organisations to thrive and succeed in the future. Some interesting key themes emerged. An organisation's approach to flexibility and new ways of working is crucial in impacting employee loyalty. This is particularly prevalent with the Generation X, baby boomers and millennials. Pay, career development and flexibility are now the key drivers for employees to remain working for their current employer. Achieving a work-life balance is the biggest challenge faced by employees at the moment to remain productive in the workplace. This is followed by hours worked and their current workload. For employers, what does this mean? Some are now enhancing technology capabilities at home, allowing new flexible work schedules, and some are introducing or considering analytics to measure productivity. Productivity is an interesting point. Some research by EY has recently shown a disconnect. 64% of employees in the sector feel productivity has increased since the pandemic, but you break that down into the baby boomer demographic and Generation X again, respondents think otherwise. Interestingly, those who are working in the technology sector think productivity has increased by 78%. Whereas the wider FS sector, it's slightly lower at 68%. Some of the other key themes that emerged from our hybrid working insight session recently showed balancing flexibility and the need to work together was a major consideration. How do firms, as we've discussed recently, ensure team building and team bonding? How do teams stay connected? How does relationship building happen? High degrees of trust are almost essential, and some encourage tacit learning. Other considerations and the role of learning in a hybrid environment are also major factors for some of our members. Considerations for teams and individuals need to be considered. Tax and location regulations for employees and overseas working. Managing flexible working requests when employees can demonstrate productivity. And careful management and HR guidance is of course needed in these areas. Recruitment is a huge consideration, especially in a hybrid environment. The market is changing. Flexibility is considered a candidate must at the moment. Firms need to ensure promotions and performance management are not impacted by hybrid working and at all costs avoiding a proximity bias. In October 2020, the Commission published research into the future of work with KPMG. This was based on a survey of 1,500 employees across our sector. Data showed that 78% of FS workers reported they were able to perform most or all aspects of their role remotely. This increased our understanding of how employees in the sector feel about hybrid working and how their skills match the demands of this style of working. Firms are definitely demonstrating flexibility, greater flexibility, and they are indeed making adjustments. Let me just give an example of this taken from the financial services regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority. Recently, and it's been well documented, the board agreed staff can work 40% of their time in the office. The regulator has now reported this greater flexibility was the best way for them to work effectively, productively, and inclusively. The general consensus from our insight session recently indicated there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and firms are working hard to find a successful middle ground. The need to harness key skills, behaviours and talent alongside driving productivity and innovation has never been greater. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Some interesting points there, and I think the one point I wanted to make on this, the increased flexibility, just through my role, really, I have seen what was once just never allowed, as in working from home when you want, and now to have that flexibility and to give that to someone, something that Paul said earlier on. I think when suddenly you're asking people to come into the office for a certain meeting or something like that, there is almost a reluctance for people to do it, like that they feel that they have more power over the employer. And I'm just imagining that, having that conversation 2-3 years ago with some of the employers we work with, that trying to argue that actually Joe Bloggs should be able to work from home whenever he wants. It would just be a crazy conversation to have. Whereas now there is I guess the landscape has changed in that respect. But thank you. Kevin, Caroline, has anything come through that for Lindsay?
Nothing's come through on the chat, although there's been some great comments about the speakers so far and the nuggets taken away. But I think, Kevin, have you got any questions?
Yeah, I think, Lindsay, around my question areas, you've touched on them all, and I sort of want you to go a bit deeper, I suppose. So I'm going to let you go wherever you want. You don't even have to deal with my question. But I'm really interested in that sort of, it's linking with Nick. It's sort of, we've definitely reached a new place. It feels like there's some movement in some places back. There's other movement which is to a new place. There's other ones which I think are going to feel more like Star Trek every week. It's great. Well-being within all of this. Those vulnerable people who either have to feel they want to go into the office, or want to stay more at home, don't want to come in 2 days a week as legislated by their senior managers. And then I loved what you finished up with. It was really nice where you talked about productivity, inclusion, and innovation. So bringing those together, the whole diversity and inclusion thing as well. Please go around those subjects, or wherever you want to, but in more detail.
Sure. I think the inclusion piece, and Laura touched on it earlier, is really interesting. And this February, with the Financial Services Culture Board, we surveyed 4,000 financial services employees, and that took place, I think, back end of last year, beginning of this year. And what was really, it was basically looking at their attitudes to inclusion in the workplace, and it had never been done before, not on that scale anyway. And I think the key themes that came out of that really was developing a culture of listening was the major theme that employees felt most passionately about. And if you look, we're kind of post-pandemic, so I think that was quite a prevalent point to make. And they feel that diversity has perhaps not been as prominent, inclusion has not been as prominent as diversity, and they like to see that highlighted as much as possible. Because it's, you know, if we look at some of the recent research, the figures for the FS sector hasn't been that great. So our figures, although they basically said employees were generally on the whole happy, there were certain areas that needed improvement, and the listening aspect really came through. And then if you look at, I think beginning of the year, our chief executive of the regulator came out and said that for too long there has not been a stand up and speak up culture in our sector. I think those were his exact words. And I think the results of our survey actually mirror that. So I thought it was very interesting.
And around well-being and that element within it.
Yeah, no, I think, and you know, I don't know if anyone else has any great examples. Post-pandemic, especially, a lot of organisations have really developed the wellbeing at work and a number of wellbeing at work initiatives, and I think that's incredibly important. You know, mental health at work, obviously incredibly important. Specifically and interestingly, today is World Menopause Day, and this time last year we produced some research with Standard Chartered Bank, which actually showed that there was a huge culture of silence at work in financial services. Really staggering figures. I've written them down actually. So out of 3,000 people surveyed, 47% felt they couldn't apply for a promotion given their current status with the menopause and the transition they were going through. 25% were considering leaving the workforce, and 25% also said they were considering retiring early. That is a huge cohort of females. 1 year on, we produced research yesterday, which showed 61% of organisations are implementing menopause support. So in terms of wellbeing at work, we're absolutely seeing progress, which is something to really kind of celebrate, but there's absolutely more to be done.
No, excellent. And Nick may do this as well, but AFF, we ran earlier in the year an event on menopause, incredibly well attended. It's on our website and it's a highly recommended one to go and have a look at if either as an employer or an employee body you're facing that. The thing that keeps coming through for me is about ask your employees, listen to your employees, by all means have a trajectory you want to go, but how can your employees work flexibly in that, not within prescriptive things. If you're giving advice to an employer to be more listening, or to an employee body to help an employer listen more, what would that be from the FS, Lisa?
So I think what our members are telling us is, and again, I think there's a consideration here about the size of organisation, because it's easier for, say, a small firm of 12 employees to have a training day on inclusivity in the workplace and proximity bias, etc., as examples. I think if I pick out, so Zurich Insurance, Barclays, Standard Charter, all huge organisations, have implemented kind of some really interesting training policies. And I think if there's anybody on the call today that kind of wants an example of best practice, I think a lot of those are available on their website as well. So I'd encourage them to kind of have a look at what's happening there.
And when you're saying training policies, Lindsay, what are you sort of referring to in particular?
So,
some examples, illustrations?
So I think there's some brilliant examples of how firms are measuring inclusion. So on the FSSC, on our website, we produce best practice on how firms are measuring, for example, socio-economic data and what they need to consider. So I think that's incredibly important when we think about the inclusion space right now. In terms of menopause awareness, if you look at our website, and also I think Zurich has some brilliant examples of training that's been conducted that firms can actually implement quite easily. So yeah, I think they're good kind of signposts.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Nick. Caroline.
I can see that there's a question that's come into the box, which I'm sure Caroline will pick up. But just to preface it, I wanted to mention something about what you said about vacancies, because I think this is a really interesting point, because you said, what, 51,000 vacancies in the sector. Now, it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about what was going to be called the Great Resignation after COVID, as people, take stock of their lives, I guess, and rethink it. And I'm pretty sure we've just had the lowest unemployment rate since 1974. So, and we're supposedly in a recession where the markets are shrinking. So it's just a really interesting point of how have we got 51,000 vacancies and the lowest unemployment rate since 1970s and a constricting economy all going on at the same time. And Caroline, do you want to just pick up on the question that's come on it as well?
Yeah, so we've had a sort of comment question come in, which says, is the increase in the number of applicants applying for roles where there is full flexibility and no requirement to be in the office, down to individuals now being able to apply for roles in companies they don't live anywhere near, to now being able to apply fully flexibly without needing to travel to and without having to live near their office? And I guess that also goes for some of the organisations whose internal candidates might have applied for jobs elsewhere in the country during the pandemic to still being allowed to do the jobs where they live and where they currently are. And I guess, question wise, do you think that that has helped with the whole reduction in unemployment, because people are able to move and to move around organisations that they would never have applied to before previously, because they've been able to do it remotely?
Yeah, I think that the geographical consideration is massive, and I think, for example, I used to commute into London 5 days a week, 3 hours, and then do a 12-hour day on top of that, as did a number of other people. And I think the beauty of, or one of the benefits actually, if benefit is the right word, post-pandemic, is that there is greater flexibility, and firms are now really recognising that. So you could be a data management expert based in Edinburgh, but your firm's based in Brighton, and having that greater flexibility is allowing or opening up a huge talent pool across the UK. And I actually think that's something to be celebrated.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the greater talent pool, and hopefully, companies, and I think goes back to what Kevin was asking Paul about recruitment. I think that change in how you recruit someone has to come about in order to make sure that people are making the most of that opportunity. So thank you so much, Lindsay. That was great. I will stop spotlighting you from there. And if people want to find out more, then obviously just Google the Financial Services Skills Commission. I've had a look at it myself. There's a bunch of research material on there from some good topics. So please, everyone, check out their website. So, and we are now going to hear from Miriam, who I need to allow camera and mic and make a presenter, because I think you popped out for a minute. So just do that. And can you hear us, Miriam?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, we can hear you, but not see you as yet.
Let me do that again. Can you see me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect.
So Miriam is from the 4-Day Week campaign, a campaign officer. So over to you.
Thank you, and it's great to be here, and it's really lovely to hear from everyone. I think it's been a really insightful discussion so far. Yes, so I will begin with my slide deck. Is that okay? Can everyone see?
Yes, we can, yes.
Perfect. So the type of work that we do and the way that we work has changed drastically over the past few decades. Because of advancements in technology and automation, there have been questions on if the way that we work should change as well. the pandemic has been devastating for many people and businesses, and it's led us to reevaluate and reprioritize what's important to us. Now we have this movement of both workers and businesses pushing for a 4-day working week. Earlier this year, we began our 6-month trial to test out how a 4-day working week would look like in the UK. We've had over 70 companies and over 3,000 workers taking part in the trial so far. And so far, we've had some really interesting findings of how that's going. So the 4-day week is based on the 100-80-100 model, which is essentially us advocating for there to be 100% pay for 80% of time in exchange for 100% of productivity, or a commitment to maintain at least 100% productivity. There's a wide range of sectors that are represented in the pilot programme. There are many representatives from the financial sector. We have Pattern Bank taking part, and we have quite a few fintech companies that are also taking part in the trial. But it's really a diverse set of sectors. We have, you know, things like fish and chip shops, who a fish and chip shop which is open 7 days a week, and the 4-day week so far has worked, you know, tremendously well for them, and they're able to maintain the level of customer service that they were before, and they've seen great, you know, increases in productivity and well-being, and have said that they would love to continue having the 4-day week after the trial ends. So it's a really interesting and wide range of sectors that are being represented, which again goes to demonstrate that, you know, this isn't just a model of working for your traditional office desk-based 9-to-5 jobs. This can work across multiple sectors, and it can definitely work really well in the financial sector. So far, we've reached the midway point of the study, and the results have been really positive. We've had 86% of companies who are taking part in the trial saying that they would love to continue having a 4-day week after the trial ends. We've had 88% of companies reporting that the trial is working really well, and I think most importantly for businesses at least, we've seen that 95% of businesses taking part in the trial have said that productivity has either maintained the same or improved, which I think is, you know, really important for businesses who are considering transitioning into a 4-day working week. And we have some really great examples of how the 4-day week is working well across a range of sectors. We have Claire Daniels, who's the CEO of Trio Media, saying that the 4-day week has been extremely successful for business. Not only has productivity increased and well-being increased, there's actually been a 44% benefit financially as well, which again is a really important message to convey. I think when a lot of the times when people and companies think of a 4-day working week, they associate that with a loss of income and a loss of output, whereas we've seen actually that that's not turning out to be the case. Companies are in fact doing better financially. Companies are actually being more productive when we work less. Sharon Platts, who's the Chief People Officer for Outcomes First Group, did acknowledge that, you know, as with change, there is a transition period, but it's been, you know, transformational for their business as well. And again, it's been working really well, and it's had such a positive impact on workers. Similarly, we've had businesses say that you know, that there has been an initial period of change and transition, but overall the outcomes have been really positive as the weeks move by, and even during really busy periods with high workload, the 4-day week has still been able to maintain productivity and hasn't impacted the quality of work. And again, there are massive business benefits to the 4-day week. You know, I think most importantly, workers are happier and more motivated, which I think is, again, really powerful considering we've had 2 or 3 years of, you know, I think just political turmoil and crisis and pandemics. You know, we have a workforce that is tremendously burnt out. We've had people who have lost loved ones because of the pandemic. You know, and we're going through a period where, you know, we're seeing the, you know, as you said, the Great Resignation, and businesses really need to be more innovative in terms of, you know, attracting the top talent. And we've seen that the 4-day week really helps with retention, but really helps with attracting the best talent as well. We also have reduced sick days, which again saves businesses a lot of money when it comes to you know, maintaining output and productivity. And also, I think an important point to raise when discussing the benefits of the 4-day week is that it actually helps tackle gender inequality as well. A lot of the times, women, when they have children or decide to raise a family, have to work less. And on average, according to a report by the Women's Budget Group, women work on average 30 hours a week after they have a child. This means that they have to take up jobs that are below their skill set or level of qualification, and it means that they're no longer able to, you know, push for leadership roles that they would want to do otherwise because of time restraints. When we have a 4-day week, what we have is a 32-hour week with no loss of pay, which means that if everyone is working reduced hours, if everyone is working less, that allows childcare responsibilities to be more evenly distributed, and in turn should help tackle gender inequality and the gender pay gap as well. Similarly, the 4-day week is also a great way to tackle climate change. We have some really, I think, powerful data on what a massive impact the 4-day week can have on the level of carbon emissions that the UK emits. Moving to a 4-day week would mean that we would reduce our carbon emissions by 21%. That is a massive number. That's the equivalent of taking off all private cars from the roads in the UK. And, you know, considering that we've had climate catastrophe after climate catastrophe, the 4-day week is also a great opportunity for businesses to show leadership on climate change. Again, I think a lot of the points that that companies raise when considering the pros and cons of a 4-day week is what impact that will have on their business, what impact that will have on their productivity, and most importantly, what that would mean in terms of you know, customer service and maintaining client relationships. The 4-day week doesn't have to look the same for every single business. We've seen different businesses take different days off. For example, Unity public relations firm in London gives half of their team Mondays off while the other half takes Fridays off. So essentially the company is still able to operate 5 days a week, even though their workers get an extra day off during the week. And this again has really helped with recruitment, and it's really helped to attract the best talent, which in turn saves money as well, because you don't have a prolonged period of time where you are waiting to fill a vacancy, or you don't have to outsource work to contractors who can be at times more expensive. So what's next? So after the 6-month trial officially ends on the 1st of December, academics from the University of Cambridge and Oxford and the Boston College in the US will measure the results and see where to move forward from here. We anticipate that the results will be published in February 2023, so we'll be able to look at the data more in more detail and see how the 4-day week has impacted things like well-being, productivity, mental health, retention, in terms of the businesses who are taking part in the trial. This is, a global movement. We have 4-day week pilots around the world, in Europe, in New Zealand, Australia, and in the US. And really, this is looking like it could be the future of work. It may not happen tomorrow, it may not happen next year, but in the next 5 to 10 years, this is becoming more and more of a likely possibility. Yeah, and that's it for now. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Miriam. That's really interesting. I think it's an important point, isn't it, to remember that we didn't always have a 5-day working week, let alone a 4-day working week. So the increase of automation and artificial intelligence, and I guess more focus on things like mental health. It's it kind of seems like a pie in the sky idea until you really kind of boil down to it and see, actually, is this working? And I liked your point about the gender equality as well, and just knowing, what the cost of childcare looks like. This could be a real game changer in terms of that. It's a given that we all know in this industry that more women take more flexible working approaches. So it's a really interesting point. I just did have one question. I don't know whether or not you have this kind of level of information, but when we're talking about kind of financial gains for company, do you know what really that's coming from? Are we talking about cuts in costs, or are we talking about increases in income, if that makes sense?
So there are multiple things. I think the main thing is that actually reducing a working week by 1 week actually increases productivity. So the gains that businesses are seeing are directly to do with profits that they are making. And income, but also there's also savings to be made in terms of the money that companies save from preventing from essentially reducing the level of the amount of sick days that workers take, because they're better rested and not burnt out and not unwell because they've been working 12-hour days. So there's multiple ways in which this benefits companies financially.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've just seen that someone's mentioned that the 21% carbon reduction alone makes this a desirable outcome. So thank you so much. Caroline, anything else come through from the chat?
Yeah, there was one comment from Paul about how much the increased productivity is about the 4 days, or how much of it is actually about the interest taken in the trust shown to people to be able to reduce their working week, but also keep the productivity the same. And also how many of the organisations participating in the trial have hinted at potentially keeping this on past December.
I think to begin with, what we've really seen from workers taking part in this trial is, an increased level of motivation and desire to work smarter, to work smarter and work harder and find more efficient ways of working, which is only really been able to exist because workers are better rested, workers are less likely to be burnt out, and workers have better well-being and mental health because of the extra day that they get off. So that there are people arguing that if you are if you were able to be this productive over 4 days, why aren't you able to demonstrate the same level of productivity over 5 days? But the reason for that is that there is no, incentive for workers to work smarter, to work harder, when they know that they're not getting that extra day off. So that extra day off is really what's driving people and pushing people to make changes in the way that they work. And in terms of if organisations taking part in the trial are hinting that they'll continue with this following December, it's been really overwhelmingly positive. We've had 86% of companies saying that they will actually continue with this moving forward. And outside of the trial in the UK, we already have almost 100 companies who currently have the option of a 4-day week. So this isn't necessarily, a new idea as well in the UK. We're seeing this work well, across multiple sectors, and we're seeing this work well outside of the trial as well.
Thank you. I mean, I like that idea. There's the necessity is the mother of invention. With less time, it might actually be really good for research and development areas in order to try and get better productivity. And there's that, rather than the age-old just using the most expensive resource that we have, which is people, constantly just working them into the ground to get the better productivity. So yeah, I like that one. Kevin, is there anything else that you had?
Yeah, Miriam, please, can I go into the detail here? So obviously, I assume there's no one size fits all, but are we talking about people concertina their, I don't know, let's go a 35-hour week from 5 days into 4? Are we talking about the benevolent employer that goes, hey, I'll carry on paying you the same salary you did for 5 days, but now you only have to work 4? Or are in effect people reducing their salaries by 1/5? And when you talk about, there was that lovely quote from one of the leaders. Was that leader also working just a 4-day week, or is there some sort of hierarchical cutoff within a structure?
Yeah. So essentially everyone is working a 4-day week, whether you're the CEO or whether you've just started working at the organisation a week ago. And the key part in this is that we're not, advocating for there to be a loss in pay. We want, a 32-hour week with no loss of pay. That's when we see the benefits of a 4-day week. We're not advocating for people to work less and be paid less, because then we don't see the same benefits in terms of productivity, in terms of well-being. When we really start to see the benefits is when there is a commitment from workers to be like, I am able to do the same amount of work, or in fact even more work sometimes over a shorter period of time, because that extra day off is really valuable for me, and that extra day off really gives me time to rest and recuperate, and gives me the opportunity to clear my head and come back on Monday, stronger and revitalized.
So is there then I think this is where I would have gone, say that my likelihood would have been, instead of working, I don't know, 8-hour days, I'd be working 10 or more hour days to get it all done in the 4, so I could have the Friday or the Monday off. Does your research go into that and measure whether that's happening as a consequence?
I think we'll find out more when we get the final results after the trial ends. But so far, from what we've heard anecdotally, people are genuinely able to switch off after their 9 to 5 day. And in fact, it's really pushing people to set boundaries. I think a lot of the people went into this trial expecting that even though they have an additional day off during their week, that they would also be spent secretly working and finishing off work that they weren't able to finish. But that, from what we've heard, hasn't been the case. And we have had examples of people saying that they didn't think that that would be possible. But when everyone else isn't working, you know, that Monday or that Friday, it's actually harder for you to even work on that day, because a lot of our work is dependent on other people. So that, you know, the happy accident that happens there is that you're essentially, you know, forced to not work as well.
And I mean, potentially I'm a real huge fan, although my working career is nearing the end. I was studying my IPM back in the 80s, and the 4-day week was this thing on the horizon at that point in time. So, you know, I wish you well with the traction. I'm going to go 2 places here, Nick. One for Nick and Mariam, which is, I think, can we write something so in February 23 we get access to the results? It'd be really good to be able to report to AFF affiliates, you know, how this has gone. And Mariam, more of a challenge. So you said in your data that 95% of companies saw more profitability, or the same or more, sorry. I worked that out using my maths at about 150 companies saying not that, i.e. that it was less productivity. Have you got any insight into that as well? What were the components that were sort of leading to that part of the story?
So it's not profitability per se, but it's productivity, which may or may not translate into profitability. And in some cases it does, as we've seen with the examples that the CEO of the True Media was saying that profitability went up by 44%. But it's interesting, and I think there is a lot of data on it, and there are companies for which the 4-day working week may not work well, but that could be due to multiple factors. That could be perhaps that pay was stopped. That could be because of a lack of commitment from perhaps management to not really ensure that everyone's doing a 4-day week, where it's a 4-day week but you're actually still working a 5-day week. And that that could also be because those 4-day weeks were compressed hours. So it wasn't a 32-hour 4-day week, it was maybe a 35-hour or 40-hour 4-day week. So there's really like multiple factors that play into it. But I mean, so far from what we've found out, and during this pilot study, I mean, we're only at the midway point right now. But from what we know so far is that it is working in terms of productivity, and sometimes it's also beneficial in terms of profits as well.
Thank you, Mariam. And Nick, I just think a shout out for AFF here that the Alliance of Finance did a survey on hybrid working, and a lot of our affiliates contributed to that. And I think today we've heard it as well, which is there's no one model here. It is very much individual. And sorry if I'm going across your closing remarks, but I think what I picked up with that survey was exactly that. And I think the strength of AFF is if affiliates are not finding traction with something they're trying, come and chat to some of the other affiliates, chat to you, Caroline, and myself, because we've probably seen somewhere else where it's working. Or we can put them in touch with either the FSSC data, Mariam's, or other data, which will help them be persuasive with their employer in looking at alternatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Mariam, in terms of the work that the 4-day week campaign, it's really interesting to hear this, because I mean, may I say that I think that the sector, the finance sector here, is probably very reluctant to look at this. But as you've said, actually there have been some companies who have gone through this trial, and some fintech companies, etc., who have shown that actually can work. And it's about I guess that other conversation, some of the affiliates who are in attendance here may be thinking, yeah, I'll just be laughed out of the office if I start that conversation. But actually, you know, it's perhaps time to start putting that that thought in the head that that is possible. There's been a couple of comments around the number of hours. I think you mentioned, didn't you, you're looking at changing what is essentially a 40-hour week into a 32-hour week as the general. That's the with no loss of pay, right? And can I ask, you know, around that, when you have someone who does 32 hours already, is that a conversation that's had? Does the employer look to increase the wages, or does the person generally look to decrease their hours down to, I don't know, 24 or something?
So I think this is truly really dependent on each organisation. We've seen cases of where people who already work 32 hours have had their salary increased. We've seen cases of where there's been no loss of pay for, you know, people who are working 32 hours, but they've actually had their hours reduced by 20%, 20% to really line up with what would now be considered as full-time pay if your company's working a 4-day week.
Okay, yeah. So I guess again, it's that no one size fits all approach, isn't it? It's from everyone. And how much did your organisation and the other organisations like Autonomy, etc., get involved in in organising that with the companies, or was it kind of, here's our plan, how we like to see it, now you go away and implement it as you see fit?
No, it was exactly that. I think our main requirement was that it needs to be a 32-hour week with no loss of pay, and how you interpret that and how you implement that is up to you. We did offer, you know, guidance on, you know, working smarter and more efficiently, but really it was up to the companies to do what, you know, they wanted to do, and to create this into a model that suited their business interests. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Miriam. It was really interesting. And, you know, I think, as I said, it just shines the light on the fact that actually when we're talking about hybrid work and we're talking about flexible working in general, we're not just now focusing on home working, working from home or the office, but actually the whole idea, the whole of what working now looks like. I think I said in one of the newsletters that I put up regarding this, it does feel that we're on the cusp of a change, of a real change as to how work is, how we do work, how we go to work, how we live work, etc. And, you know, I think it would be a shame if out of the massive change that we've gone through, we just end up going back to the same old that we used to do, because, you know, I think if anything, this change in hybrid working, this trial that Miriam and the 4-day week are doing is showing that actually there are some real benefits here that can be gained, some real gains that can be made. And if we are reluctant to do that just because of the age-old phrase of we've always done it that way, then that will be, I think, a real shame. So I encourage everyone who is here and who is listening to us to start having those conversations if you haven't already, and to really, I guess, ask your employers and ask yourselves to look at the system that you've got and ask yourself whether or not it's working, or could it be working better, because I think we've heard a number of examples today of where actually you can get some real benefits which perhaps haven't been thought of before. And as Kevin rightly said, you know, you may have come up with a system which might be working, but one size does not fit all, and therefore maybe those conversations need to be revisited. So I just want to say thank you so much to Laura, Paul, Lindsay and Miriam for your insights. I think it was really interesting. And Miriam, is it okay if we commit to speaking again in February and releasing the results? That would be great. Thank you very much. Yeah, we will share Paul's and Miriam's slides as well. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Kevin, for your help today. It was very interesting. Thank you so much to everyone who attended. As we've said, this will be made available on the website, so please, if you know anyone in your organization who may be interested in that, then please send them to our website. And just a quick mention of our next event, which is actually going to be hosted by Morrish Solicitors, who are going to do an update on employment law for us on the 16th of November at 12 p.m. So I'll send out the registration link for that. And that is in particular reference to the planned, shall we call, bonfire of employment rights that are being mooted around. So that should be a really interesting point. Kevin?
Yeah, and just say sort of it's a case roundup of the year as well. So if you haven't got your sources from everywhere else, I think we've got the head of employment law for Morrish will be coming along, and we'll be doing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So look out for that. We hope to see you there. And just leaves me to say thank you very much and goodbye.